The atom bomb exploded just a third of a mile over this river, killing an estimated 80,000 people instantly.
Strong male voice said in the total darkness, "Don't give up. I'm trying to free you."
Please make many friends from other countries. When you do so, you are moving the world towards peace.
I tried to move my body, but I couldn't, so I knew I was faced with death. Burned, blackened, and swollen, and the parts of the bodies were missing. I made a vow I would dedicate my life. All night, the city burned, the huge ball of fire.
The advent of nuclear weapons changed the world irrevocably. The massive destruction and the horrendous human toll was not entirely unexpected, as its makers knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that this would change the face of conventional warfare and shake the foundations of the world's power structures. A glimpse into the events unfolding in front of the horrified eyes of the witnesses to the destruction wrought on Hiroshima and Nagasaki would push us all into becoming staunch advocates of the disarmament movement. Let's take a look at the events that unfolded in August 1945. First target, Hiroshima. The explosion of Hiroshima, codenamed Operation Centerboard 1, was approved on August 4, 1945. A manufacturing center of some 350,000 people located about 500 miles from Tokyo was selected as the first target. After arriving at the U.S. base on the Pacific island of Tinian, a more than 9,000-pound uranium-235 device was loaded aboard a modified B-29 bomber christened Enola Gay, which carried Little Boy to its target on August 6, 1945. Little Boy was a uranium gun-type device that exploded with about 13 kilotons of force. At the time of the incident, Hiroshima was home to 280 to 290,000 civilians as well as 43,000 soldiers. In a split second, half of them annihilated. While the plane getting ready to drop its weapons load on the heads of people down below did its business, just 6 miles beneath it, the unaware people of Hiroshima were waking up and preparing for their daily routines. It was 8:16 a.m. Up to that point, the city had been largely spared by the reign of conventional air raids that had ravaged many other Japanese cities. Still, many citizens, including school children, were recruited to prepare for future raids by tearing down houses to create fire lanes, and it was at this task that many were laboring or preparing to labor on the morning of August 6. Just an hour before, air raid sirens had sounded as a single B-29, the weather plane for the Little Boy mission, approached Hiroshima. A radio broadcast announced the sighting of the Enola Gay soon after 8 a.m. Unbeknownst to them, what was about to befall them would be written in the annals of history. While the crew of Enola Gay did its business by dropping the device and felt the might of the Little Boy sending gale force winds at their airplane, little did they know the hell it had unleashed on the people down below. Those who were close to the epicenter of the explosion were simply vaporized by the intensity of the heat. One man left only a dark shadow on the steps of a bank where he sat. The mother of Mikoyo Osugi, a 13-year-old schoolgirl working on the fire lanes, never found her body, but she did find her Geta sandal. The area covered by Miyoko's foot remained light, while the rest of it was darkened by the blast.
A remarkable woman who survived a nuclear bombing, yet still has peace in her heart. The atom bomb exploded just a third of a mile over this river, killing an estimated 80,000 people instantly.
Please make many friends from other countries. When you do so, you are moving the world towards peace.
The aftermath. Hiroshima stands on a flat river delta, with few hills or natural features to limit the blast. The device was dropped on the city center, an area crowded with wooden residential structures and places of business. These factors meant that the toll and destruction in Hiroshima was particularly high. The firestorm in Hiroshima destroyed 13 square kilometers of the city. Almost 63% of the buildings in Hiroshima were completely destroyed and many more were damaged. In total, 92% of the structures in the city were either destroyed or damaged by blast and fire. Many others in Hiroshima, farther from the Little Boy epicenter, survived the initial explosion but were severely wounded, including injuries from and burns across much of their bodies. Among these people, panic and chaos were rampant as they struggled to find food and water, medical assistance, friends and relatives, and to flee the firestorms that engulfed many residential areas. Having no point of reference for the device's absolute devastation, some survivors believe themselves to have been transported to a hellish version of the afterlife. The worlds of the living and the deceased seemed to converge. The city of Hiroshima was annihilated by the explosion. 70,000 of 76,000 buildings were damaged or destroyed, and 48,000 of those were entirely razed. Survivors recalled the indescribable and incredible experience of seeing that the city had ceased to exist. Estimates of total deceased in Hiroshima have generally ranged between 100 and 180,000 out of a population of 350,000. Tens of thousands perished immediately, and many more in the days and months that followed.
Strong male voice said in the total darkness, "Don't give up. I'm trying to free you," to warn the world about the danger of nuclear weapons. At 8 o'clock, we started the morning assembly. I made a vow I would dedicate my life. And at that second, I saw the bluish-white flash all over the window. I tried to move my body, but I couldn't, so I knew I was faced with death. 1,000 people are dying. Not one single doctor, no medication, no food.
Next target, Nagasaki. The decision to use the second device was made on August 7, 1945 on Guam. Its use was calculated to indicate that the U.S. had an endless supply of the new weapon for use against Japan, and that the U.S. would continue to drop atomic devices on Japan until the country surrendered unconditionally. The city of Nagasaki, however, was not the primary target for the second atomic device. Instead, officials had selected the city of Kokura, where Japan had one of its largest munition plants. The B-29 Boxcar, piloted by Major Charles Sweeney, was assigned to deliver the Fat Man to the city of Kokura on the morning of August 9, 1945. When the plane arrived over the city nearly 7 hours later, thick clouds and drifting smoke from fires started by a major raid on nearby Iwata the previous day covered most of the area over Kokura, obscuring the aiming point. Pilot Charles Sweeney made 3 runs over the next 50 minutes, but crew member Bien was unable to drop it because he could not see the target visually. By the time of the third run, Japanese anti-aircraft fire was getting close, and Second Lieutenant Jacob Besser, who was monitoring Japanese communications, reported activity on the Japanese fighter direction radio bands. Running low on fuel, the crew aboard Boxcar decided to head for the secondary target, Nagasaki. When the B-29 arrived over the city 20 minutes later, the downtown area was also covered by dense clouds. Frederick Ashworth, the plane's weaponeer, proposed conducting the mission over Nagasaki using radar. At that moment, a small opening in the clouds at the end of the 3-minute run permitted Behan to identify target features. At 10:58 a.m. local time, Boxcar visually dropped Fat Man. It exploded 43 seconds later, with a blast yield equivalent to 21 kilotons of TNT at an altitude of 1,650 feet, about 1.5 miles northwest of the intended aiming point. Thus, 3 days after the U.S. dropped an atomic device on Hiroshima, a second was dropped on Nagasaki, a 21-kiloton plutonium device. On the day of the incident, an estimated 263,000 people were in Nagasaki, including 240,000 Japanese residents, 9,000 Japanese soldiers, and 400 prisoners of war.
Burned, blackened, and swollen, and the parts of the bodies were missing. Physical and psychological strength to yell, "Hey, I'm in trouble, give me and help me." They were almost naked, clothes were tattered, hair was standing up. All night, the city burned, the huge ball of fire.
The resultant destruction. The Allies had been conducting raids on Nagasaki periodically. Though they were relatively small, it created considerable concern in Nagasaki, and many people were evacuated to rural areas for safety, thus reducing the population in the city at the time of the nuclear attack. The radius of total destruction from the atomic blast was about 1 mile, followed by fires across the northern portion of the city to 2 miles south of where the device had been dropped. In contrast to many modern aspects of Hiroshima, almost all of the buildings in Nagasaki were of old-fashioned Japanese construction, consisting of wood or wood-frame buildings with wood walls and tile roofs. Many of the smaller industries and business establishments were also situated in buildings of wood or other materials not designed to withstand explosions. As a result, the atomic explosion over Nagasaki leveled nearly every structure in the blast radius. The failure to drop Fat Man at the precise aim point caused the atomic blast to be confined to the Urakami Valley. Because of the extent of the devastation and chaos, including the fact that much of the two cities' infrastructure was wiped out, exact number of deceased from Hiroshima and Nagasaki remains unknown. However, it's estimated roughly 70 to 135,000 people lost their lives in Hiroshima and 60 to 80,000 people in Nagasaki, both from acute exposure to the blasts and from long-term side effects of radiation. Japan surrenders. At noon on August 15, 1945, Emperor Hirohito announced his country's surrender in a radio broadcast. The news spread quickly, and Victory in Japan celebrations broke out across the U.S. and other Allied nations. The formal surrender agreement was signed on September 2 aboard the U.S. battleship Missouri, anchored in Tokyo Bay. In the wake of annihilation, many survivors feared that nothing would grow on the decimated Earth.
What do you want the world to remember?
Eliminating nuclear weapons is the path to peace.
One of those survivors who has spent 3/4 of a century on a quest to rid the world of nuclear weapons.
At 81, she says she's been blessed to live. Her mission now, banning all nuclear weapons.
By the time spring of 1946 arrived, the citizens of Hiroshima were surprised to find the landscape dotted with the blooming red petals of the oleander. Now the official flower of Hiroshima, the oleander offers a beautiful symbol for the city as a whole. But in the months that followed, many would be surprised to learn of the limited long-term health effects of the nuclear attacks. Among the long-term effects suffered by survivors, the most fatal was leukemia. An increase in leukemia appeared about 2 years after the attacks and peaked around 4 to 6 years later.
I remember the horror of that day. Blinding light like thousands of strobe lights, my body thrown to the ground.
But that building, now known as the Atomic Bomb Dome, was one of the few things left standing. Years later, she even met Clifton Truman Daniel, grandson of President Harry Truman, who ordered the bombing.
Children represent the population that was affected most severely. Nearly 70 years after the incidents, most of the generation that was alive during the attack have passed away. Now much more attention has turned to the children born to the survivors. While the immediate aftermath of the attack was horrendous and nightmarish, with innumerable casualties, the populations of Hiroshima and Nagasaki did not allow their cities to become the sort of wasteland that some thought was inevitable. Hiroshima and Nagasaki have become the beacons of hope, proving that amidst tragedy there remains hope for the future. That's all we have for you, folks. Join us next time.